The spring of 1878 arrived in Wyoming territory with a violence that reminded everyone why the frontier demanded respect. Austin Quade stood at the edge of the North Platte River, watching the swollen waters tear past with a fury that matched the turmoil in his chest. At 25 years old, he had already buried more people than he cared to count. His parents taken by cholera, his younger brother shot down by cattle rustlers, his best friend trampled in a stampede. The frontier had taught Austin one undeniable truth: love was a luxury that got people killed. Out here, survival meant keeping your distance, your heart locked up tighter than a bank vault, and your eyes always on the horizon for the next disaster. He pulled his black Stetson lower against the morning sun, his lean, athletic frame casting a long shadow across the muddy bank. The stubble on his jaw was 3 days old, just enough to suggest he had more important concerns than appearances. The spring thaw had transformed the usually manageable river into a churning monster, and half his cattle were still on the wrong side, along with the lined shack where 2 of his ranch hands had taken shelter. He needed to find a safe crossing point before nightfall, or the Rocking Q Ranch would lose more than he could afford. What Austin wanted was simple: keep his ranch running, keep his remaining hands safe, and keep himself from forming any attachments that the merciless West could rip away. What he refused to acknowledge, even to himself, was the crushing loneliness that pressed down on him every night in his empty ranch house, the way his hands ached for something beyond rope and leather, the hollow place in his chest that no amount of whiskey or hard work could fill. The sound of wheels and frantic voices snapped his attention upstream. A wagon was careening toward the river's edge, the team of horses wild with panic, foam flying from their mouths. Austin's body moved before his mind caught up, his long legs covering ground in powerful strides. He could see the driver now, a portly man in a brown suit yanking uselessly on the reins, and beside him, a young woman in a blue traveling dress, her blonde hair whipping in the wind as she clutched the seat. The wagon hit a rut. The woman flew into the air with a scream that cut through the river's roar. Austin watched her trajectory with the cold calculation of a man who had learned to separate emotion from action. She was going to hit the water 30 feet from the bank, right where the current ran fastest. The driver would be lucky to keep the wagon from following her in. Austin had perhaps 40 seconds to reach the point where the river would carry her past, or she would be swept downstream into the rapids that had claimed 3 lives last spring. He ran parallel to the bank, his boots sliding in the mud, calculating angles and speed with the precision that made him one of the best cattlemen in the territory. The woman surfaced, her dress already dragging her down, arms flailing. She could not swim, most women could not, most men could not for that matter, not in water like this. Austin did not hesitate. Hesitation killed. He dove from a flat rock that jutted into the current, the icy water hitting him like a fist, driving the air from his lungs. The river seized him immediately, trying to drag him under, but he had swum this river 100 times, knew its moods and its malice. He angled across the current, letting it carry him toward where she thrashed, her blonde head disappearing beneath the surface once, twice. His hand closed on fabric. He yanked hard, pulling her against his chest, wrapping one arm around her waist as he kicked for the bank. The current fought him, every stroke a battle. The woman had gone limp, either unconscious or too exhausted to struggle. That made it easier. He could feel the rapids approaching, could hear their hungry roar growing louder. His boots scraped bottom. He pulled harder, muscles burning, and then hands were grabbing him, pulling them both onto the muddy bank. Austin rolled the woman onto her side. She coughed, water streaming from her mouth, her whole body convulsing. He pressed on her back until she vomited river water, then drew a shuddering breath that told him her lungs were clear. Only then did he allow himself to look at her properly. She was young, perhaps 20 years old, with blonde hair that hung in wet ropes past her shoulders and skin pale as cream, except for the blue tinge around her lips. Even soaked and gasping, she was striking, with delicate features that seemed wildly out of place in this rough country. Her blue dress was quality fabric, probably from back east, and completely impractical for frontier life. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were the deep brown of rich earth, wide with shock and fear. "You are safe," Austin heard himself say, his voice rougher than he intended. "Just breathe." She stared at him, those brown eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was real or some fever dream conjured by near drowning. Then the driver was there, huffing and wheezing, wringing his hands. Miss Fenwick. Miss Penelope Fenwick, "Oh, thank the Lord, your father will have my hide. I told him the spring crossing was too dangerous, but he insisted you arrive before the month's end, and now look what has happened." Penelope. The name registered somewhere in Austin's mind, filing itself away without his permission. He stood, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers small and cold in his calloused palm, and he pulled her to her feet. She swayed, and his other hand shot out to steady her waist. Through the wet fabric he could feel she was shivering violently. "You need dry clothes and a warm fire," he said. "My ranch is 2 miles west. The wagon can follow." "I cannot possibly impose," Penelope managed through chattering teeth. "My father, he is expecting me in Ashford Springs. I am already late." "You will be later if you catch pneumonia and die," Austin replied bluntly. He turned to the driver. "Can you manage the team?" The man nodded, still pale. "The horses have calmed. The wagon sustained no damage, by the grace of God and your quick action, young man." "I am Horace Brennan, escort to Miss Fenwick, who is traveling to join her father, the new owner of the Ashford Springs Mercantile." Austin felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the river water. Ashford Springs was the nearest town to his ranch, population 200 souls if you counted generously. A new mercantile owner meant the previous owner, old Sam Mackey, had finally sold out. It meant change, which Austin distrusted on principle. It meant this woman, with her frightened eyes and Eastern manners, would be living within a day's ride of his carefully constructed isolation. "Austin Quade," he replied shortly. "Rocking Q Ranch, follow the Western Trail, you will see the gate." He did not wait for a response. He lifted Penelope Fenwick into his arms before she could protest, ignoring her sharp intake of breath and the way her arms instinctively circled his neck. She weighed almost nothing, though whether that was due to her natural build or because the river had drained all her strength, he could not say. His horse was tethered 50 yards upstream. He carried her there in silence, intensely aware of every place their bodies touched, her head resting against his shoulder whether she meant it to or not. He settled her in front of his saddle and swung up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to keep her upright. She was still shivering, her body trembling against his. Austin tried not to notice how perfectly she fit against him, tried not to breathe in the scent of river water and something floral that clung to her hair. This was a rescue, nothing more. He had done the same for stranded calves and injured ranch hands. It meant nothing. But as they rode toward his ranch, Penelope Fenwick silent and shaking in his arms, Austin felt something crack in the careful walls he had built around his heart. It was small, barely noticeable, like the first fissure in spring ice before the thaw. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself she would be gone to her father's house by evening, and he would never have to think of her again. He was wrong on both counts. The Rocking Q Ranch house sat in a valley sheltered by cottonwoods, a solid 2-story structure Austin's father had built from local timber before the cholera took him. Austin carried Penelope inside and set her in the chair closest to the hearth, then set about building up the fire to a roaring blaze. She watched him work in silence, her arms wrapped around herself, still shivering. "There are rooms upstairs," Austin said without looking at her. "My mother's clothes are still in the trunk in the blue room. They will be old-fashioned but dry. You should change." "I cannot wear your mother's clothes," Penelope protested, her voice stronger now but still trembling. "It would not be proper." Austin straightened, meeting her eyes directly. "Propriety will not keep you from dying of cold. My mother has been gone 4 years. She would want her things used by someone who needs them. The room is second on the right. There is a wash basin and clean water. I will make coffee." He turned away, giving her privacy to make her decision. After a moment, he heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and uncertain. Austin exhaled, unaware he had been holding his breath. He stripped off his own wet shirt, wringing it out over a bucket, then grabbed a dry one from the line by the back door. The coffee pot took longer to prepare than usual because his hands were unsteady, which irritated him. He had pulled drowning men from flooded rivers before. He had carried wounded soldiers during his brief stint as a Confederate scout during the war. This was no different, except it was, and he knew it. When Penelope descended the stairs 20 minutes later, Austin's breath caught despite his best efforts. His mother's dress was indeed old-fashioned, a simple gray wool with a high collar and long sleeves, but it fit Penelope's slender frame as if made for her. She had toweled her hair partially dry so it fell in damp waves around her shoulders, catching the firelight in shades of gold and honey. Her color had returned, the blue tinge gone from her lips, replaced by a natural pink that drew his attention more than it should. "Thank you," she said quietly, settling back into the chair. "I cannot seem to stop shaking." "Shock," Austin replied, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "It will pass." He handed her a cup, then settled into the chair opposite, maintaining a careful distance. "You were fortunate. 3 people drowned in that river last spring. The thaw makes it unpredictable." Penelope wrapped both hands around the cup, staring into the dark liquid. "Mr. Brennan warned me, but I did not understand. Everything out here seems designed to kill you. The river, the cold, the emptiness. How do people survive?" "By respecting what can kill you," Austin said, "and by not forming attachments that make you careless." She looked up at that, her brown eyes curious. "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "Loneliness does not kill you, love does." The words came out harsher than he intended. Penelope flinched slightly, then recovered, her chin lifting in a gesture he would come to recognize as her stubborn streak emerging. "My mother loved my father for 30 years before she passed," Penelope said. "She died peacefully in her sleep. Love did not kill her. Time did, as it kills everyone eventually. But those 30 years, by her account, made everything worthwhile." "Your mother did not live on the frontier," Austin countered. "Out here, love makes you vulnerable. It makes you care about things you cannot control. And when the frontier takes what you love, which it will, it destroys you." "You speak from experience." It was not a question. Austin took a long drink of his coffee, using the time to decide how much to reveal. Something about this woman's direct gaze made him want to talk, which was dangerous. He settled for the bare facts. "My parents, my brother, friends. The frontier has taken them all. I have learned the lesson." "That you should stop caring, stop connecting," Penelope shook her head. "That is not survival, Mr. Quade. That is just a slower form of dying." Her words hit him like a fist to the gut, striking too close to thoughts he refused to examine. Austin stood abruptly. "Your driver should arrive soon. I will check the trail." He escaped outside, breathing hard, angry at himself for letting a stranger's observations affect him. The afternoon sun had burned off the morning chill, and in the distance, he could see a wagon kicking up dust on the western approach. Good. Horace Brennan and his charge would be gone within the hour, and Austin could return to his carefully ordered, deliberately empty life. But when the wagon arrived and Brennan fussed over Penelope, checking her condition with the anxiety of a man who knew he had nearly lost his employer's daughter, Austin found himself reluctant to see her leave. She thanked him with genuine warmth, her brown eyes meeting his directly. "I owe you my life, Mr. Quade. I do not know how to repay such a debt." "No debt," Austin said gruffly. "Anyone would have done the same." "But you did it." She smiled then, a soft expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Perhaps I will see you in Ashford Springs. My father's mercantile will open next week." "Perhaps," Austin agreed, knowing he would avoid the town for as long as possible. Ashford Springs meant people, meant questions, meant the risk of conversation that might lead to connection. He had supplies enough to last a month. He watched the wagon roll away, Penelope's blonde hair visible until distance and dust obscured her completely. Then he turned back to his empty house and the cold comfort of solitude. 3 days passed before Austin admitted he could not stop thinking about her. He tried to blame it on the dramatic nature of the rescue, the natural human tendency to remember moments of high emotion. But he knew better. It was the way she had looked at him, as if she could see through his carefully constructed defenses. It was her words which had burrowed into his mind and taken root. "That is not survival. That is just a slower form of dying." On the 4th day, one of his ranch hands rode in with news that made Austin's carefully maintained distance impossible to sustain. "Boss, there is trouble in town," Jack Winters announced, swinging down from his saddle. Jack was a solid man of 40, one of the few hands who had stayed on after Austin's brother died. The new mercantile owner brought his daughter out from Philadelphia, and some of Garrett McBride's boys are making a nuisance of themselves. Saying things they should not, making her uncomfortable. The marshal is out tracking horse thieves, so there is no law to handle it. Austin's hands tightened on the fence rail he had been mending. "Penelope Fenwick. You know her." I pulled her from the river 4 days ago. What kind of trouble are McBride's men causing? Jack spat into the dirt. The usual, making comments when she walks by, hanging around the mercantile, scaring off customers. The father is beside himself, but he is no fighter. McBride's boys know it. They are testing him, seeing how far they can push. Garrett McBride owned the largest ranch in the territory, and his crew included more than a few men who were one step ahead of the law. Austin had avoided conflict with McBride by keeping to himself, managing his own smaller operation without interference. But if McBride's hands were harassing Penelope, someone needed to intervene. You said the marshal is gone. 3 days minimum before he returns. Austin swore under his breath. He did not want to get involved. Getting involved meant showing he cared, which meant exposing the very vulnerability he had spent years protecting. But the alternative was leaving Penelope and her father to fend off men who would interpret their Eastern refinement as weakness. That is just a slower form of dying. Saddle my horse, Austin said abruptly. I am going to town. The ride to Ashford Springs took 90 minutes at a steady pace, giving Austin plenty of time to question his decision. What exactly was he planning to do? Walk into the mercantile and announce himself as Penelope Fenwick's protector? That would start exactly the kind of talk he had avoided for years, would mark him as caring about something beyond his ranch. But by the time he reached the town's main street, the answer was clear because he could see the problem with his own eyes. 3 men lounged outside Fenwick's mercantile, men Austin recognized from McBride's ranch. Tom Slattery, Walt Hammond, and Carl Jennings, all of them the kind who enjoyed using their size and numbers to intimidate. They were not doing anything overtly threatening, just standing there, making crude jokes loud enough to be heard inside the store, laughing in a way that set Austin's teeth on edge. He tied his horse to the rail and approached with the deliberate stride of a man who owned the ground he walked on. The 3 men noticed him, their laughter fading. Austin Quade, Tom Slattery said, his tone mocking. Do not see you in town much. What brings you off your ranch? Business, Austin replied shortly. He moved past them toward the mercantile door, but Slattery shifted to block his path. Heard you played hero, pulling that pretty blonde from the river. That why you are here? Hoping for a reward, Slattery grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. She is a fine-looking woman. Shame she is so unfriendly. We were just trying to welcome her to the territory, but she acts like we are not good enough to speak to. Austin met Slattery's eyes, his voice dropping to the low, flat tone that men who knew him recognized as dangerous. Move. Something in his expression made Slattery step aside. Austin entered the mercantile, the bell above the door chiming. The interior was clean and well-organized, with shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to fabric to ammunition. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s, balding and anxious, who Austin assumed was Richard Fenwick. And beside him, sorting through a crate of supplies, was Penelope. She looked up at the bell's chime, and her face transformed with relief when she recognized him. She wore a practical brown dress with a white apron, her blonde hair pinned up in a simple bun. She looked tired, with shadows under her eyes that had not been there during their first meeting. Mr. Quade, she said, moving around the counter, I did not expect to see you. Miss Fenwick, he removed his hat, nodding to her father. Mr. Fenwick, I was in town and heard you were having some trouble. Richard Fenwick's shoulders sagged with what looked like relief mixed with shame. I am afraid the local element has decided to test the new proprietors. They have been outside for 2 days, making my daughter uncomfortable and driving away customers. I have tried reasoning with them, but I am not a man of violence, Mr. Quade. I fear I am ill-equipped for this frontier. You should not have to be equipped for it, Austin said. Decent men do not harass women. The marshal will handle it when he returns, but in the meantime, I can make it clear that continued harassment will not be tolerated. Penelope stepped closer, her brown eyes searching his face. Why are you doing this? You made it clear you want no attachments, no involvement with others. Why risk conflict with McBride's men for people you barely know? It was a fair question, one Austin had asked himself during the entire ride to town. The honest answer was that he could not bear the thought of her afraid, could not stomach the idea of men like Slattery making her feel unsafe. But admitting that would be admitting his carefully constructed walls had already begun to crumble. Because it is the right thing to do, he said instead, and because I do not like bullies. He turned before she could press further, settling his hat back on his head. Outside, Slattery and his companions had been joined by 2 more men from McBride's ranch. 5 against 1, not ideal odds, but Austin had faced worse during the war. He stepped into the street, his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver on his hip. "Time to move along," Austin said, his voice carrying clearly. "You have had your fun, it is over." Tom Slattery straightened from the wall, his expression hardening. "This is not your concern, Quad. We are not breaking any laws. A man can stand on a public street. You can stand on it while moving down it, away from this store. And if we choose not to—" Austin smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Then we can discuss it in a way you will not enjoy." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Austin could feel eyes watching from windows up and down the street, could sense the town holding its breath. Slattery was measuring him, trying to decide if Austin was bluffing. Then Walt Hammond, who had more sense than his companions, spoke up. "Let it go, Tom. Quad fought with Quantrill's raiders during the war. He is not someone we want to test." It was not quite true. Austin had scouted for various Confederate units but had never ridden with Quantrill's bushwhackers. But he did not correct the exaggeration because the reputation served his purpose. Slattery's eyes narrowed, but after a long moment, he spat into the dirt and jerked his head toward the horses tied nearby. "This is not over, Quad. McBride will hear about you sticking your nose in." "Let him hear," Austin replied evenly. "And let him know that if his men continue bothering the Fenwicks, he and I will have words." Slattery and his companions mounted up and rode out, making enough noise and bluster to save face. Austin watched until they disappeared down the road, then turned back to find Penelope standing in the mercantile doorway. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of gratitude, concern, and something else he could not quite identify. "You made an enemy today," she said quietly, "for us, for people you claim to want no connection with." Austin adjusted his hat, suddenly uncomfortable under her direct gaze. "McBride's men are cowards. They will not push further, not if it means real confrontation. You do not know that. My father heard McBride is dangerous, that he has connections to some of the outlaw gangs in the territory." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You contradicted yourself today, Mr. Quad. You said love and connection make you vulnerable, but you just made yourself vulnerable for us. Why?" "Because I cannot stop thinking about you. Because your words have been eating at me for 4 days. Because maybe I am tired of being alone, even if admitting it terrifies me. Because it was the right thing to do," he repeated, knowing it was a coward's answer. "Your driver will be more careful in the future. The river crossing is safer 2 miles south, where the rocks create a natural ford." He was retreating and they both knew it, but Penelope let him, her brown eyes too knowing for comfort. As he mounted his horse, she called out, "Mr. Quad, will you come for supper tomorrow? My father and I would like to thank you properly. We have living quarters above the store." 6 o'clock. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to maintain the distance that kept him safe. But he heard himself say, 6 o'clock, I will be there. As he rode out of town, Austin tried to convince himself he was simply being polite, accepting a neighborly invitation to dinner. But the anticipation already building in his chest told a different story. Penelope Fenwick had gotten under his skin, had made him care despite his best efforts, and the most terrifying part was that he was not entirely sure he wanted to stop it. The next evening, Austin stood outside the mercantile at 5 minutes before 6, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He had bathed, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt, the dark blue one his mother had made for him before she died. He told himself he was simply showing respect for the invitation, but the truth was harder to ignore. He wanted to look good for Penelope Fenwick. The stairs along the side of the building led to a door on the 2nd floor. Austin knocked and Richard Fenwick answered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Mr. Quad, please come in. We are so grateful you could join us." The living quarters were modest but comfortable, with a parlor that doubled as a dining area and a small kitchen visible through an open door. Penelope emerged from the kitchen, wearing a green dress that brought out golden tones in her hair. She had loosened her hair so it fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and the effect was striking enough that Austin forgot to breathe for a moment. "Mr. Quad, welcome. Please sit. Dinner is almost ready." She gestured to the table already set with 3 places. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables. As they ate, Richard Fenwick talked about his hopes for the mercantile, his plans to make Ashford Springs a proper town with culture and opportunity. Austin listened politely, but his attention kept drifting to Penelope, the way she moved, the sound of her voice when she added observations about the town or asked questions about ranch life. "Penelope tells me you saved her life," Richard said eventually, his expression growing serious. "I cannot adequately express my gratitude, Mr. Quade. She is my only child. If she had drowned in that river, I would not have survived it." "I did what anyone would do," Austin replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "But you were the one who did it," Penelope interjected. "You risked your life without hesitation. That speaks to your character, regardless of what you claim about avoiding attachments." There was a challenge in her tone, an echo of their earlier conversation. Austin met her eyes across the table. "Saving someone from drowning is different from forming lasting connections. Is it you came to town yesterday to protect us from McBride's men? That suggests connection, whether you acknowledge it or not." "Penelope," her father said gently, "perhaps we should not interrogate our guest." "It is all right," Austin said, though it was not. "Miss Fenwick is not wrong. I have spent years avoiding entanglements, and yet here I sit, having dinner with people I barely know, having made enemies of dangerous men on your behalf." "It is inconsistent." "It is human," Penelope said softly. "We are not meant to be alone, Mr. Quade, not even on the frontier, especially not on the frontier. People need each other to survive out here. You know that, even if you pretend otherwise." The conversation was veering into territory Austin did not want to explore, not with her father present, not when his own thoughts were chaotic enough already. He changed the subject, asking Richard about Philadelphia, about the journey west, about anything that would steer them away from discussions of connection and need. But after dinner, when Richard excused himself to work on the store's ledgers downstairs, Austin found himself alone with Penelope on the small balcony outside the living quarters. The evening was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set behind the mountains. Penelope stood at the railing, her arms wrapped around herself, and Austin joined her, maintaining a careful distance. "You are afraid," Penelope said without preamble. "Of me, of what you feel. I can see it in the way you retreat every time we talk about anything real." Austin's jaw tightened. "You do not know what I feel." "Do not I?" She turned to face him, her brown eyes reflecting the dying light. "You pulled me from a river, brought me to your home, confronted dangerous men on my behalf, and accepted a dinner invitation despite every instinct telling you to run. Those are not the actions of a man who feels nothing. They are the actions of a decent man helping a neighbor. If that is all it was, you would not look at me the way you do." Her voice was soft but unflinching. "I am not some delicate Eastern flower who cannot read a man's interest, Mr. Quade. You are attracted to me, and if I am being honest, I am attracted to you. But you are so determined to protect yourself from loss that you will not even acknowledge what is happening between us." The directness of her words stole his breath. Austin stared at her, his carefully constructed defenses crumbling with each syllable. He wanted to deny it, to retreat behind the walls that had kept him safe for years. But standing there in the fading light, with Penelope looking at him with a mixture of challenge and vulnerability, he could not summon the lie. "You do not understand what you are asking," he said finally, his voice rough. "I have lost everyone I cared about. My mother, my father, my brother, friends, fellow soldiers. The frontier takes everything eventually. Caring about you would mean giving the West another weapon to destroy me. Or it would mean finding someone to face the frontier with instead of facing it alone," Penelope countered. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint floral scent of her hair, could see the determination in her expression. "I am not asking you to marry me, Austin. I am asking you to stop running from the possibility of connection. To admit that maybe, just maybe, the risk is worth taking." No one had used his first name in years, not since his brother died. Hearing it from her lips sent a shock through his system, breaking something loose inside him. Before he could stop himself, his hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her soft skin. She leaned into the touch, her eyes never leaving his. "You scare me," Austin admitted, the words dragged from some deep, honest place he had buried long ago. You make me want things I swore I would never want again. Good, Penelope whispered, because you scare me too. I have been in this territory for less than a week, and already I am drawn to a man who is determined to keep me at arm's length. But I am not giving up, Austin Quade. I am not letting you hide behind your fear. She reached up and placed her hand over his, pressing his palm more firmly against her cheek. The gesture was intimate, trusting, an offer and a challenge all at once. Austin felt something crack wide open in his chest, years of carefully maintained isolation shattering under the weight of her courage. He kissed her. He meant it to be gentle, careful, a test of waters. But the moment his lips met hers, something ignited between them. Penelope's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, and Austin responded with a hunger that shocked him. He had not let himself feel like this in years, had not allowed the heat and want and desperate need that now flooded through him. She tasted like hope and danger and everything he had denied himself, and he could not get enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Penelope's eyes were bright. See, the frontier did not strike you down for caring, you are still standing. Austin laughed, a sound rough with disuse and emotion. Give it time. I intend to, Penelope said, her smile radiant. All the time in the world. Over the following weeks, Austin found his carefully ordered life upended in ways both terrifying and exhilarating. He visited Ashford Springs more often than he had in years, always with some excuse about needing supplies or checking on reports of trouble. The truth, which everyone including his ranch hands recognized, was that he was courting Penelope Fenwick. They took walks along the safer stretches of the river, rode out to see his ranch, sat together on her balcony in the evenings talking about everything from books to cattle to their shared losses. Penelope told him about her mother's slow death from consumption, about watching someone she loved fade away over months. Austin, in turn, found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone. About finding his brother's body, about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, about the bone-deep fear that caring for people only set him up for more pain. But you are caring anyway, Penelope pointed out one evening as they sat watching the sun set. Despite your fear, that takes more courage than avoiding risk altogether. Or it makes me a fool, Austin replied, though without heat. Then we are both fools, Penelope said, lacing her fingers through his. Because I am falling in love with you, Austin Quade, and there is nothing safe or sensible about it. The words should have sent him running. Instead, they settled into his chest like a warm ember, burning away the cold he had carried for so long. He pulled her close, breathing in her scent, and let himself believe, just for a moment, that maybe the frontier would not take this from him. But the frontier had other plans, as it always did. The trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon when Austin was working with his hands to move cattle to higher pasture. Jack Winters rode up fast, his expression grim. Boss, we have got a problem. Garrett McBride himself just rode into Ashford Springs with 10 men. Word is he is looking for you, says you humiliated his hands and need to answer for it. Austin's blood ran cold. Where is the marshal? Still out tracking those horse thieves. The town is defenseless and McBride knows it. Is Miss Fenwick safe? She is in the mercantile with her father. McBride's men are surrounding the building. They have not done anything yet, but it is clear they are using her to draw you out. Every fear Austin had ever harbored about caring for someone crystallized in that moment. By allowing himself to care about Penelope, he had painted a target on her back. McBride was using her to get to him, exactly the kind of vulnerability Austin had spent years trying to avoid. That is just a slower form of dying. The words came back to him, spoken in Penelope's clear voice. He could run. He could take his hands and disappear into the mountains, let McBride cool down, avoid the confrontation. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. It would also mean abandoning Penelope to whatever McBride decided to do to make his point. It would mean proving that every fear Austin had about connection was justified, that caring made you weak, that love was a trap. Or he could ride into town and face whatever came, not because he had stopped being afraid, but because she was worth the risk. Austin was in the saddle before he consciously made the decision. Jack, gather whoever is here and follow, but stay back unless shooting starts. This is my fight. Boss, 10 against 1 are bad odds. Then I will have to be smarter than they are, Austin replied, kicking his horse into a gallop. The ride to town seemed to take forever and no time at all. Austin's mind raced through possibilities, strategies, ways to de-escalate or, if necessary, fight. Garrett McBride was a hard man, but he was not stupid. Public violence would bring territorial authorities down on him, would make operating his ranch difficult. If Austin could appeal to McBride's self-interest, maybe this could end without bloodshed. But as he rode into Ashford Springs and saw the scene waiting for him, Austin realized McBride was beyond reason. The rancher stood in the middle of the street, flanked by armed men, his expression dark with anger. And behind him, two of his hands were dragging Penelope from the mercantile, her father following helplessly. Austin's vision went red. He pulled his horse to a stop 30 feet from McBride, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. "Let her go," Austin said, his voice deadly calm. McBride smiled, but it was a cold expression empty of humor. "Austin Quade, good of you to join us. We have been waiting. Seems you made some bold claims about having words with me if my boys bothered the new merchants. Well, here I am. Let us have those words. Your men were harassing a woman. I stopped it. That does not have to lead to this. You humiliated my crew," McBride said, his voice rising. "Made them look weak in front of the town. You think I can let that stand? People need to know that crossing me has consequences. Then your issue is with me, not with her." Austin jerked his chin toward Penelope, who was struggling against the men holding her arms. "Let her and her father go. We can settle this, you and I." McBride pretended to consider, then shook his head. "No, I think the girl stays. She seems important to you, which makes her useful. See, I need everyone in this territory to understand something. I run things here. Me. Not the marshal, not the territorial government, certainly not some nobody with a played-out ranch and delusions of heroism." Austin's hand tightened on his reins. He could feel the weight of the Colt on his hip, could calculate the draw, the shots, the chaos that would follow. He might take down McBride, maybe 2 or 3 others, before they killed him. It would not save Penelope. It would just prove that everything he had believed about connection and vulnerability was right. Then Penelope's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. McBride, you are making a mistake. Whatever grievance you have with Mr. Quade, involving me will bring attention you do not want. My father has connections back east, including a brother who works for the territorial governor. If anything happens to me, it will not be swept aside." McBride turned to look at her, his expression skeptical. "That's supposed to scare me, girl." "It should," Richard Fenwick said, finding his courage. "My brother, James Fenwick, is chief legal counsel to Governor Campbell. You harm my daughter, and every lawman in the territory will be hunting you. Your ranch, your operation, everything you have built will be finished." It was a bluff, Austin realized. A desperate play to introduce doubt, but it was also brilliant because it gave McBride a reason to back down without losing face. The rancher's eyes narrowed, calculating the risk. "That true, Quade? The girl's uncle is connected to the governor." Austin met Penelope's eyes across the distance. She gave him the slightest nod. He had no idea if the claim was true, but it did not matter. The story just needed to be plausible enough to give McBride an out. "It is true," Austin lied smoothly. "You want to test it, go ahead. But when territorial marshals show up to arrest you for kidnapping and threatening a government official's niece, do not say you were not warned." The street had fallen silent, every resident watching from windows and doorways. McBride was trapped. If he backed down, he looked weak. If he pushed forward and the claim was true, he risked destroying everything. And if the claim was false but he had already acted, he would have committed serious crimes for nothing. After a long, tense moment, McBride jerked his head at his men. They released Penelope, who immediately ran to her father. McBride turned his cold gaze on Austin. "This is not over, Quade, not by a long shot. But today is not the day. Just remember, you have made an enemy, and I have a long memory." McBride and his men mounted up and rode out, leaving a wake of dust and murmured conversations. Austin dismounted slowly, his legs unsteady, the adrenaline draining out of him now that the immediate danger had passed. Penelope broke away from her father and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "That was foolish," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Austin replied, holding her tight. "That is what I was trying to avoid. This is exactly what I feared. Caring about you made you a target." Penelope pulled back, her eyes fierce. No, being a decent man who stood up to bullies made me a target. There is a difference, and I am not sorry it happened because it proved something important. What? That you love me enough to face your worst fear. That you would risk everything for me just as I would for you, that we are stronger together than apart. She cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Austin Quade, not despite your fear, but because you feel it and choose courage anyway. Austin kissed her there in the street, in front of the whole town, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. She was right. He did love her with a fierce intensity that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The frontier might still take her from him someday, but hiding from that possibility had not protected him. It had just made him lonely. At least now, whatever time they had, it would be filled with something real. When they finally broke apart, Richard Fenwick was watching with a mixture of amusement and resignation. I suppose I should ask your intentions regarding my daughter, Mr. Quade. Austin laughed, a full, genuine sound that felt rusty from disuse. If she will have me, I intend to marry her, Mr. Fenwick. Though I should warn you, my ranch is modest, my prospects uncertain, and I have just made a dangerous enemy. But you are honest, courageous, and you saved my daughter twice now, Richard replied. I would say that outweighs the negatives. Penelope, what do you say? I say yes, Penelope answered, her smile radiant. Though we are doing this properly, Austin Quade. You will have to actually propose. Austin knelt there in the dusty street, taking her hand in his. Penelope Fenwick, I am a broken man with a troubled past and a dangerous enemy. I cannot promise you an easy life. But I can promise to love you with everything I have, to protect you with my last breath, and to spend every day trying to be worthy of the courage you have shown me. Will you marry me? Yes, Penelope said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The town erupted in cheers, the tension of the past hour breaking into relief and celebration. But Austin only had eyes for Penelope, for the woman who had crashed into his life via a flooded river and refused to let him hide from what they both knew was true. That love, even on the harsh frontier, was worth every risk. The next 2 months passed in a blur of wedding preparations, with Penelope and her father transforming the living quarters above the mercantile into something festive despite the frontier's limitations. Austin found himself drawn into the preparations whether he liked it or not, measuring for new furniture he planned to build, helping to paint the rooms, doing 100 small tasks that made the reality of married life suddenly concrete. But the shadow of Garrett McBride hung over everything. Reports came back of McBride making inquiries about Richard Fenwick's supposed brother in the territorial government. So far, the bluff had held, perhaps because McBride was cautious enough not to risk testing it directly. But Austin knew it was only a matter of time before the rancher discovered the truth. That James Fenwick was indeed Richard's brother, but he was a bookkeeper in Philadelphia with no government connections whatsoever. When that happened, McBride would come for them, and next time there would be no bluff to save them. Austin kept these fears to himself, not wanting to dampen Penelope's joy, but Jack Winters was less circumspect. You need to tell her, boss, Jack said one evening as they worked to repair a fence line. She deserves to know that McBride is going to figure out the truth eventually. I know, Austin admitted. I just want her to have these few months of happiness before everything potentially falls apart. Hiding hard truths to protect someone is not love, Jack observed. It is cowardice dressed up as care. Tell her. Let her decide if the risk is worth taking. The words stung because they were true. That evening, Austin rode to town and found Penelope on her balcony, sewing lace onto what would be her wedding dress. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. What has happened? Austin told her everything, about McBride's inquiries, about the truth of her uncle's actual profession, about the likely consequences when the bluff was exposed. He watched her face as he spoke, seeing the fear flicker across her features before being replaced by something harder, more determined. So we run, Penelope said when he finished. We get married as planned and then we leave, go to California or Oregon, somewhere McBride's reach does not extend. You would do that? Leave your father, leave the mercantile. I would do anything to build a life with you, Penelope said fiercely. My father can sell the store, come with us, or return east. But I will not let Garrett McBride's threats destroy what we have. Austin pulled her close, overwhelmed by her courage. You are the strongest person I have ever known." "No, I am just someone who knows what she wants and is willing to fight for it," Penelope replied. "We have both lost people we loved. I refuse to lose you too, especially not because we were too scared to act." They made plans that night, quiet discussions about selling the ranch, about timing, about where they might go. It felt like defeat and victory all tangled together. Austin would lose the land his father had built, the home that held every memory of his family. But he would keep Penelope, would have a future instead of just a past. The trade seemed worth making, but 3 days before the wedding, everything changed. Austin was working in the barn when Marshal Tom Fletcher rode up on a lathered horse. The marshal was a stern man in his 50s, known for his fairness and his unwillingness to bend to pressure from powerful ranchers. He dismounted with a grim expression. "Quade, we need to talk." "It is about Garrett McBride." Austin's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. "What about him?" "He is dead, him and 3 of his top men killed 2 nights ago. Stage robbery gone wrong over in Cedar County." The robbers did not know who they were hitting, panicked when McBride and his boys fought back. Everyone died. Austin stared at the marshal, unable to process the words. "Dead, you are certain." "Saw the bodies myself. Cedar County Sheriff asked me to ride over and confirm identities since McBride operated in my territory. It is him, no question." Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "I heard about the trouble between you two. This resolves it, though not in any way I would have wanted. Robbery and murder are not justice." After the marshal left, Austin stood in the barn, his mind reeling. Garrett McBride was dead. The threat that had hung over him and Penelope, the enemy that had nearly driven them to abandon everything, was simply gone. Erased by random violence, by the frontier's casual brutality. He should feel relief. Instead, he felt a strange emptiness, as if bracing for a fight only to have the opponent vanish. But beneath that, something else began to grow, a fragile, tentative hope. They did not have to run. They could build their life here in the place Austin knew, with Penelope's father close by. The future he had started to imagine could actually happen. He rode to town immediately, finding Penelope in the mercantile. One look at his face, and she knew something significant had happened. "What is it?" "McBride is dead, killed in a robbery 2 nights ago." Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. "You are certain?" The marshal confirmed it himself. "He is gone, Penelope. The threat is gone." She sat down heavily in a chair, the color draining from her face. "I should not be glad someone is dead, but all I feel is relief." "I know," Austin said, kneeling beside her, "but it is over. We can stay. We can build the life we wanted without looking over our shoulders." Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "We can really do this. Get married, build a home, have a future." "Yes," Austin said, taking her hands. "All of it. Everything we talked about." She kissed him then, deep and desperate and full of released tension. When they broke apart, both were crying, years of fear and loss and hard-won hope spilling over. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon, 3 days later as originally planned. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of Ashford Springs, with half the town in attendance. Penelope wore the dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace trim, and she was so beautiful that Austin forgot to breathe when he saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm. Reverend Matthews conducted the ceremony with warmth and brevity, understanding that frontier weddings were less about pageantry and more about public commitment. When Austin slipped the simple gold band onto Penelope's finger and spoke the words binding them together, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. All the walls he had built, all the defenses against connection and loss, crumbled completely. He was vulnerable now in ways that should terrify him, but instead he felt free. Penelope's vows were steady and sure. "I promise to stand with you in joy and hardship, to build a home in this wild land, to love you without reservation for all the days of my life." When the Reverend pronounced them married, Austin kissed his wife with a tenderness that held all the love he had denied himself for years. The congregation cheered, and for the first time since his brother's death, Austin felt like he belonged to something larger than himself. The celebration afterward was modest, held in the mercantile with food contributed by various townsfolk. Jack Winters made a toast that was only slightly off color, earning him a swat from his own wife. Richard Fenwick welcomed Austin into the family with genuine warmth, then pulled him aside for a private word. "Take care of her," Richard said quietly. "She is stronger than she looks, but this land can be brutal. Make sure she knows she is loved every day." "I will," Austin promised, "with everything I have." As evening fell, Austin and Penelope left for the rocking Q Ranch, now their shared home. Austin had spent the past week making improvements. New curtains in the bedroom, furniture he had built himself, small touches to make the house feel less like a bachelor's lonely refuge and more like a home. As he carried Penelope across the threshold, she laughed with delight. "You have been busy. When did you do all this?" "Late nights," Austin admitted, setting her down gently. "I wanted you to feel welcome. This is your home now, Penelope Quade." "Every part of it." Hearing her new name made Penelope's eyes shine. "Say it again." "Penelope Quade, my wife." She pulled him close, and the kiss that followed quickly deepened into something more urgent. They made their way upstairs, laughing and stumbling. Years of loneliness and fear burned away in the heat of their connection. That night, in the bed Austin's father had built 40 years before, he and Penelope began the intimate exploration of married life, learning each other with tenderness and passion, building memories to replace the ghosts that had haunted the house for so long. The months that followed were the happiest of Austin's life. Penelope threw herself into ranch life with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, learning to ride, to help with cattle management, to handle the 1,000 daily tasks that kept a frontier ranch running. She was not as physically strong as the ranch hands, but she was clever and determined, finding solutions to problems through intelligence when strength failed. More importantly, she transformed the ranch house from a place of isolation into a genuine home. She planted a garden that somehow survived the harsh Wyoming weather. She invited neighbors for dinners, creating a social circle Austin had avoided for years. She filled the rooms with laughter and music, singing while she cooked, reading aloud in the evenings, bringing life to spaces that had been empty tombs of memory. Austin found himself changing in ways both subtle and profound. The nightmares that had plagued him for years grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. The constant tension he had carried, the expectation of loss and disaster, gradually eased. He learned to laugh again, to plan for the future, to believe that maybe the frontier would not take everything from him after all. By their first anniversary, Penelope was visibly pregnant, her belly swelling with the child they had created. Austin was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, his old fears resurfacing as he contemplated the vulnerability of bringing a child into the world. But Penelope's unshakable confidence steadied him. "We will be good parents," she assured him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We will teach our child to be strong but also to love deeply, to respect the frontier but not fear it, to build connections instead of hiding from them." "You make it sound easy," Austin said, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby move. "It will not be easy, nothing worth having is, but we will do it together just like everything else." Their son was born in March of 1879, delivered by the town doctor with Austin pacing frantically downstairs until Penelope's cries gave way to a baby's wail. When the doctor finally let him enter the bedroom, Austin found his wife exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," Penelope said softly. "I was thinking we could name him James after my uncle. The name brought us luck once." Austin took the baby carefully, overwhelmed by how small and fragile he seemed. This tiny person represented everything Austin had sworn never to risk, every vulnerability he had tried to avoid. And yet, holding his son, feeling the baby's warmth and weight, Austin felt not fear but a fierce protective love that dwarfed everything that had come before. "James Quade," he said, testing the name. "Welcome to the world, son. I promise to do better by you than I did by myself." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. A second child arrived 2 years later, a daughter they named Sarah after Austin's mother. The ranch prospered as Austin's careful management and Penelope's business sense combined to create a successful operation. They expanded the herd, bought adjacent land when it became available, built additional structures to house seasonal hands. Richard Fenwick sold the mercantile when he turned 60, moving to a small house on the ranch property where he could be close to his grandchildren. Jack Winters became ranch foreman, his loyalty to Austin now extending to the entire Quad family. The community of Ashford Springs grew around them, evolving from a rough frontier town into a proper settlement with schools and churches and civic organizations. Through it all, Austin never forgot the lesson Penelope had taught him that first day on her balcony. That isolation was not protection but a slower form of dying. He learned to open his heart not just to his immediate family, but to the community, to the ranch hands who depended on him, to the neighbors who needed help during hard times. He learned that vulnerability and strength were not opposites but complements, that loving deeply meant risking loss but also experiencing life fully. One evening, 15 years after that fateful spring, when Penelope had tumbled into the North Platte River, Austin and his wife sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was now a lanky teenager who could outride most of the ranch hands, while Sarah was a spirited 12-year-old who preferred books to horses but loved the ranch fiercely nonetheless. Richard Fenwick dozed in a chair nearby, content in his old age. "Do you ever regret it?" Penelope asked, taking Austin's hand. "Giving up your isolation, taking the risk of caring." Austin looked at his family, at the life they had built together, at the home that rang with laughter and warmth. He thought about the man he had been, locked in his lonely fortress of self-protection, convinced that survival meant refusing to connect. He thought about all the years he had wasted in that prison of fear. "Not once," he said, pulling Penelope close. "You saved me just as surely as I pulled you from that river, maybe more." "We saved each other," Penelope corrected. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our fears, from the isolation we think will protect us." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Austin kissed his wife and silently thanked the rushing river that had brought her into his life. The frontier had taken much from him over the years, but it had also given him everything that mattered. In learning to love, to truly open his heart despite the risks, he had found not vulnerability but strength, not isolation but belonging. The Rocking Q Ranch continued to prosper for decades, eventually passing to James and then to his children. But it was always known as the place where two people had defied the frontier's harshness, where a rushing river and a daring rescue had created a love story that generations would remember. Where a cowboy who believed love made you weak learned that it actually made you whole. Where a woman from the East taught a hardened Westerner that courage meant feeling fear and loving anyway. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the river rushed past in the distance, locals swore they could still hear echoes of laughter from the ranch house, the sound of a love that had conquered isolation, transformed fear into hope, and proved that even on the harsh frontier, two hearts willing to be vulnerable could build something that would last for ages. Austin and Penelope lived to see their grandchildren, then their great-grandchildren, their love deepening and strengthening with each passing year. And when Austin finally passed at the age of 78, with Penelope holding his hand and his children gathered around, his last words were simple and true. "I am so glad I learned to stop being afraid." Penelope outlived him by 3 years, spending her remaining time surrounded by family, telling stories of the cowboy who had saved her from drowning and whom she had saved in return in ways that mattered even more. When she joined Austin in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, their children carved both their names on a single shared headstone, along with words that told their story in brief. Austin Quade and Penelope Quade. A rushing river brought them together. Love kept them forever. And in the valley below, life continued on the Rocking Q Ranch, each generation building on the foundation of courage and love that Austin and Penelope had established. Their story became legend in Ashford Springs, told and retold, a reminder that even in the hardest places, love could take root and flourish. That vulnerability was not weakness but strength. That the greatest courage was not in facing down outlaws or taming the land, but in opening your heart and allowing yourself to truly be known. The rushing river still flowed past the ranch, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild, an eternal reminder of the spring day when everything changed. And though Austin and Penelope were gone, their love remained, woven into the land they had worked, the home they had built, and the family they had created. A love story for the ages, born from a daring rescue and sustained by the even more daring choice to be vulnerable, to connect, to build something beautiful in a harsh and unforgiving world. In the end, that was their greatest legacy, not the successful ranch or the prosperous family, but the proof that love could survive anything, even the fierce and dangerous American frontier, if two people were brave enough to hold on to each other and refuse to let fear win.